Why do so many individuals want to follow orders mindlessly, even if doing so means taking part in injustices? These questions highlight a troubling reality. Is boldness a quality that only a select few possess, or is there something ingrained in our culture that prevents boldness? The majority of us ultimately determine that the ease of silence is not worth the stress of mandatory responsibilities. Standards. The decline of courage is probably the most striking thing that an outside observer notices in the West today, said Alexander Sonitun. According to R. May's research on existential psychology, bravery is not the absence of fear but the capacity to act despite it. The fear of being rejected, punished, or scorned, however, frequently overshadows our ability to act morally in this day and age. Instead of questioning, we comply, and instead of resisting, we give up. Throughout history, there have been many examples of civilizations being subjugated because the great majority of their members would rather avoid the discomfort of opposition. Examining how blind obedience has become the standard in both contemporary democracies and authoritarian governments. Let's look at how maintaining freedom might take courage as well as provide it. Why do we have such a strong tendency to obey even when our behavior is morally dubious? This problem was examined in detail by psychologist Stanley Milgram in his well-known obedience experiment from the 1960s. In this study, ordinary volunteers who had never committed violence were convinced to shock someone with electricity only after receiving instructions from a higher authority. Remarkably, about 60% of volunteers followed instructions and gave the maximum shock levels. Despite the cries of anguish, this experiment exposed a harsh reality about human nature. In an emergency, we would rather follow instructions than confront the unknowns of independent thought. We are less likely to question norms because social media has cultivated a culture of fear and surveillance. This tendency is especially noticeable in societies that place more importance on conformity than on genuineness. According to R. May, blind obedience can occasionally be confused with virtue. Since conformity is rewarded with validation and approval while opposing opinions are swiftly penalized with marginalization, many people chose the ostensibly safe route of not questioning. They internalize the notion that one must ignore one's own conscience in order to be moral. As psychologist Eric Fr. noted in Escape from Freedom, this fear of dissent also arises from the human need for belonging. In a culture that values conformity, independence is seen as dangerous. Given how commonplace conformity is, how much does resistance cost, and how can bravery help us get over our fear of questioning repressive norms? We may feel under so much pressure to fit in that we defend our own actions, even if they support injustice, because everyone else is acting in the same way. History demonstrates what occurs when a society values conformity above personal autonomy. Authoritarianism is based on mass conformity. Governments can stifle freedoms and increase their power under the pretense of morality, frequently with the help of the populace. Throughout history, authoritarian governments like the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, Nazism in Germany, and Stalinism in the Soviet Union were established with minimal opposition. In The Roots of Evil, psychologist Irvin Stab claims that the majority frequently supports repression as a valid strategy against people who oppose advancement. Similar processes can be found in modern societies, such democracies, where cultural and technological institutions work with governments to promote homogeneity. Few people question them because of the initial sense of security and conformity, and those who attempted to protest were swiftly demonized. Asking questions becomes risky in a society where censorship and surveillance are accepted as usual and are rationalized by fear and insecurity. Social media is essential to this process because it provides a platform for social pressure and propaganda. The belief that the group knows what's best is the driving force behind authoritarianism. Despite its flawed reasoning, this ideology defends restricting human liberties in the name of a purportedly higher cause. STA claims that when the majority tolerates the persecution of a minority, the continuum of destruction starts. In addition to its leaders, authoritarianism flourishes because of others who, for practical or fearful reasons, choose not to oppose this harmful behavior. Small-scale forms of exclusion, such as concept censorship and public place restrictions, can grow into institutionalized violence and systematic persecution. According to Rollo May, conformity creates an environment where people neglect their moral obligations in favor of a phony sense of security, which makes it the real threat. However, because conformity is the primary cause of authoritarianism, how can we break this cycle? The solution is courage, a trait that many people underestimate but that is nonetheless necessary for freedom. If conformity is the foundation of authoritarianism, then daring is the opposite. However, what does moral courage actually mean? Rushworth, according to Kitt's definition in his book Moral Bravery, bravery is the capacity to take chances due to one's dedication to higher principles. The ability to uphold the moral high ground in the face of criticism, rejection, and even retaliation is what is meant by moral courage, which goes beyond mere physical bravery. But because of our society's tendency towards homogeneity and fear of being different, it is a virtue that is disappearing. Two obstacles that keep people from acting in ways that align with their beliefs are fear of professional consequences and digital surveillance. A brilliant example of moral courage is Viktor Pestov, a young man who disobeyed the Soviet tyranny while knowing it would endanger his life. He established the covert organization Free Russia and wrote books that exposed the dictatorship's deceptions even though he was aware that his life and freedom were in jeopardy. As Pestov remarked after being arrested and placed in a labor camp, "I couldn't remain silent, I had to do what I had to do." Instead of a single act, such bravery is a movement that has the capacity to change entire communities. Carl Jung believed that people like Pestov, who confront injustice even when doing so puts them in severe peril, are the true leaders of humanity. But like any other virtue, courage must be nurtured. It does not automatically happen in a culture that prizes conformity over uniqueness. According to Rahm, modern courage is the capacity to act against the grain, even if it means sacrificing comfort or company. Courage is the ability to stand by our convictions in our age of conformity, he stated. But this ability calls for more than just bravery, it calls for a strong moral compass and a keen understanding that mindless obedience results in the loss of one's autonomy and dignity. However, bravery isn't limited to large-scale heroic deeds, it can also involve small, routine acts like speaking up against injustices at work, breaking the law, or even defending the rights of those who are being discriminated against. Every act of resistance, no matter how minor, contributes to the preservation of freedom. How do we promote moral bravery in a society that is so antagonistic to criticism if fighting authoritarianism is necessary? It may seem impossible to develop courage in a culture that promotes conformity, but tyranny is the situation where courage is most needed. Making deliberate decisions and adhering to principles that go above fear and social norms are necessary for cultivating moral bravery. It doesn't happen at random. Developing critical awareness is a prerequisite for becoming bold. This entails challenging norms, rules, and dominant narratives rather than blindly accepting them. As Rahm noted, in our contemporary era, automatic conformity is the opposite of courage. This implies that above all, we must be prepared to think independently, even when our opinions differ from those of the majority. The establishment of institutions that encourage individuality and intellectual independence is another essential step in the fight against monotony. Because allies are networks of moral and psychological support that enable one to transgress societal norms, making friends, even if they are few, can help one become more resilient. Authoritarianism thrives when people are isolated and afraid of being perceived as different. Last but not least, Rushworth emphasizes that taking a chance is a necessary component of bravery. Oppressive governments cannot be overthrown without suffering. But it's crucial to understand that taking a chance is an essential part of having courage. This acceptance turns fear into motivation for action by admitting that justice and freedom demand sacrifice. It can be freeing because it links us to something bigger than ourselves. Refusing to fit in is difficult, but it requires bravery that not only protects our honor but also enables others to be motivated and follow suit. Every act of bravery, no matter how small, breaks the pattern of unthinking conformity and creates space for a more free and just future. Silent catalysts for real change are often tiny acts of courage that, while initially inconsequential, when combined, create an unimaginable force that may topple even the most oppressive regimes. Not all revolutions start with loud cries in the streets or dramatic public announcements. Consider an employee who chooses to defy an unfair rule or a child in a conformist classroom who raises their hand to voice an opinion that could spark conversation. Even though these acts are straightforward, they encourage others to follow suit and break the taboo. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. It is the only thing that has ever existed, Margaret Mead once stated. This quiet revolution's secret is that it questions the legitimacy of established structures that rely on group passivity from the start. In this type of resistance, interpersonal integrity and relationships within the community are strongly prized. When everyone decides to live by their principles, no matter how small their actions may seem, an irreversible tsunami of change begins. Additional examples of silent bravery include making financial contributions to anti-oppression campaigns, learning about historical injustices, and abstaining from actions that contradict one's moral convictions. Even if they could go unnoticed, their activities have a big influence, especially when they serve as role models for others. Gandhi's nonviolent opposition. Historical examples of how seemingly insignificant actions can set off waves of global change include the American Civil Rights Movement and the quiet demonstrations of dissidents under authoritarian regimes. Social media stifles opposition and amplifies conformist voices, yet the silent revolution continues. Every open post, every challenging conversation, and every decision to live authentically is an act of courage that, when combined with innumerable others, eventually pushes the boundaries of what is possible. Susan Nidon asserts that the world of courageous men is a world of hope. May we be the ones to bear that hope, one small step at a time. When following the herd seems like the simplest and safest course of action, moral courage is an uncommon but essential trait. As the story of Viktor Pestov, the teachings of Ram May, or the cautions of thinkers like Ayn Rand show, freedom can only be maintained by those who are willing to question the status quo and take risks in the service of higher principles. By rejecting the convenience of conformity, these individuals take on the responsibility of creating a more egalitarian society. In a culture that frequently promotes compliance, it is now up to each of us to consider how we may be bold in our own lives and how we might be change agents. This movie examines how unthinking obedience fuels authoritarianism and how individual acts of resistance can work as a catalyst for social change. We would want to express our gratitude for your persistence, your participation in this reflection, and, ideally, this change. Our freedom is protected by every small act of resistance, whether it be a sincere word, a show of compassion for the oppressed, or the choice to confront injustice. Being significant doesn't need a lot of bravery. In these moments, we might start to develop the courage we need to face the problems of our day. If this video has inspired you in any way, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who could find this message helpful. Naturally, keep an eye out for further movies where we'll continue to explore topics that challenge our preconceptions and extend our viewpoints. Who knows what intellectual puzzle we may encounter next? It's a mystery that won't be solved until the time is perfect. Thank you for your courage and thoughtfulness, and I hope to see you soon.